Hi, I'm Cappy with Always in Stitches in Noblesville, Indiana, and if you're watching this video, you might be considering or might be already making Color Collage, which is a block of the month that was offered by Nancy Rink as a pattern using some beautiful, 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 beautiful fabric. I can't even tell you how pretty the fabric is. The fabric is called Greenhouse Garden. But the pattern itself is called Color Collage. And we're offering this in our store. It actually, there's a group of people that are meeting once a month, and we're kind of going through this. Part of purchasing it with us is that they get that class. But I also wanted to offer an opportunity to kind of go through some basic quilting techniques and as a routine give you some information about what we're doing as we make the block. So this is just kind of an overview of how to do this block of the month. If you do not have the pattern, it is not going to be helpful in the sense that I will not give you any dimensions or measurements or anything like that. You will need the pattern and the kit to play along with this. Other than there's just some good information that might be helpful to you, just in general quilting information. So let's get into it. The fabric came in a kit, and we do still have a couple kits left. So if you're just now watching this, you might get to purchase one of the kits. It's a 10-month program, which means that it can be a little bit done each month, and it takes 10 months to do it. So we started in February, means it should end in November-ish. You know, we'll see. Sometimes it takes longer. And shout out to Peter in the background. He's running the camera, so thanks for Peter for being here. So in any case, the pattern comes as a really nice book. I love how Nancy has created this pattern. It's got applique, so there's applique on the border, but the applique pieces come pre-fused and pre-cut, which is like awesome. If you've ever, Peter's shaking his head.
I'm shaking my head. I was impressed.
Yeah, it's a great way to get a quilt that has to be appliqued, so you don't have to figure out all the little parts and pieces. You can buy it not appliqued and pre-fused, not pre-cut and pre-fused, but why would you? I mean, really. Let's just be honest. I wouldn't even try to do that. But anyway, it does come that way, and it has a really stunning blue border that applique goes on. That's towards the end. And then the other thing I love about it is the outside of this quilt, that the setting squares look like they're pieced, but they're actually not. The fabric is just printed that way, which is going to save so much time when we get ready to put those setting squares in, because it looks like they're very complicated, but they're actually, it's just printed fabric. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But basically you do 9 squares, you do 4 a month, and then you do, of those squares, this is the first month, we're going to make 4 of these squares. And each month you make 4 squares, and then we arrange them in the quilt. I think, or maybe there's 1 month that you have to do the center square, which is much bigger, and then it just breaks it down. Just trust me. Do it one step at a time. You'll like it. So here's the fabric, and it's lovely. This piece isn't in there. Let me put this piece in there. So it's lovely, lovely, lovely. When she, so if you've done block of the month before, sometimes they assign color, each fabric a different number or each fabric a different letter. With this pattern, she actually describes the fabric rather than give you fabric A, fabric B, fabric C, which I thought was kind of unique. I like it.
Can I get a picture of the back of that cover?
You sure can. Looky there. That's the center. And these
That's
are
stunning.
Isn't that gorgeous? And this is applique again, but that's pre-cut, pre-fused. So all you have to do is glue it in place and then stitch around it.
That's stunning.
Isn't that beautiful? And it's such a simple piece. I mean, when we get ready to do that, it's going to be surprising how easy that is to make. So anyway, the way she does her colors is she just describes them like this is collage, this is blue growing, flora, green furrow. So unlike block of the months that I sometimes organize in like files by the number, this fabric I can just kind of have it sort of by the fabric because I'm going to look for what she describes. So like for the first month block that she has us do, she wants you to use the green shrubs, which happens to be, you know, this one. And then she has you use the blue framing, which happens to be this one. And when you look at them and she's described them that way, it really makes sense. The lime dappled is this one.
Oh, these colors
aren't they gorgeous? And the Peacock
Refreshing.
Solid is that one. 1, 2, 3, 4. So my first block only uses these 4 fabrics, but the way she describes them makes sense to me. I love that. I love, because fabric A, fabric B, fabric C, I was always spending all this time going back and going, okay, which one was A, which one was B, which one? But because she just says peacock, okay, I get it. That's peacock. And, you know, lime dappled. Okay, I get that, you know. So kudos to Nancy for writing it that way. It really helps it make sense. So let's get into the actual cutting and parts of it. I will tell you all the blocks square up at 9.5 inches. So if you don't have a 9.5 inch Creative Grid ruler, I would suggest you get one. It's a super great size. You'll find it's very handy just because all the way through this, all these blocks square up at that size, and that's where you want to be. So it's just nice to have that one because I don't have to think, where do I stop, where do I start?
And the link will be in the description box below to purchase those.
Yeah, if you want to buy that. And then the other question is, I'm using Aurifil thread number 2908.
Let's get a picture of that.
There you go. Aurifil 2908 is the thread color that I've decided to use with this.
It's a pretty color.
It is a beautiful color. I actually have used it really kind of, it's almost, I used to use a grayish, but I kind of find I like this one too. It kind of sinks in.
Yeah, it does.
It's a nice color that way. So let's talk a little bit about cutting. Accuracy matters. Accuracy matters. The more accurate you are when you cut your fabric, the more likely you are to have a successful project when you're done. Your piecing matters too, but I can tell you for a fact, if you don't cut your pieces right to start with, your entire project is going to be wrong. So that's why it's really important to have accurate rulers and a nice cutting mat to work with and sharp rotary cutters. You want a sharp rotary cutter. If your rotary cutter is not sharp, replace the blade because a dull rotary cutter doesn't give you a nice sharp edge to work with. So those are kind of your important tools. The nice thing about this is it doesn't take a lot. She mentions a friction pin to use. And we went and got one. Here it is. we went off to the store to be sure we had one. That's why we're giggling. She mentions a friction pin, and that's so that you can mark your half square triangles, but I've got a way to do that. You don't have to use a friction pin. What I use my friction pin, and I'm going to have you come over here to the iron, Peter, so you can see. I use my friction pin to make notes, and you can stay a little ways away, but I make notes on my pattern, and then when I don't need my notes anymore, I just iron my notes away.
That's genius, Cappy.
Awesome?
I should do that on my knitting patterns.
Yeah, I do. This is what I use my friction pin for because the friction pins were really made for the paper company. They weren't made for fabric. So when I make a pattern, and if you saw, there was notes all on there, and I just erased them by ironing it. And so now if I really I needed those notes back, I could put it in the refrigerator and it would come back, or the freezer, they'd come back. But anyway, so that's
why is this book in the freezer?
Yeah,
I need my notes.
Book in the freezer? It's because I need my notes. So with the cutting of this, you're basically going to do some pretty simple things. We're going to be making some half square triangles, and one of the things you have to do is you have to cut width of fabric. Well, actually half of the width of fabric by the distance that she requests for these to make 2 strips. And you sew those 2 strips together. Now, the reason I want to talk a little bit about that is because when you start sewing 2 strips of fabric together, long strips, especially that they're 2, 3, 4 inches wide even, what tends to happen is real easy to have happen is they'll get wiggly. Those strips will get stretched. They'll get the stitching on them can make them just kind of wobbly, and it's not a good result then when you have to go back and cut these, because what she has you do is then cut this long strip into little pieces that you can then put in right here. So that's where that piece is going to go, is right there. So what I can tell you is when you start sewing these long strips like this, be very careful not to stretch them in your machine. Be careful to keep them nice and flat. And this gives me a chance to talk about starch. Shall we laugh? There are quilters who are absolutely, you have to starch everything to death before you begin stitching with it. That is not a bad choice. I am not going to shame those people in any way, shape, or form. I think you have to do what works for you. You will get more accuracy if you starch your pieces. I like, before I cut anything, I do kind of a light spray starch. I iron it nice and flat, and then I start cutting. There are quilters who will absolutely pre-wash everything, soak it in spray starch, iron it absolutely crisp, and then they will cut their projects. That to me is a little bit of overkill, but if that works for you, don't feel bad about it. Go ahead and do it that way. It does make it more accurate because the fabric is just kind of crisp. You know, it's not going to move. But you can also start with fabric that is unwashed and still cut and get accurate cuts, I believe, if you're careful about being accurate. But it is a debate among quilters. You want to start a fire, put 5 or 10 quilters in a room and say, do you starch or do you not starch? And you will get a debate. Be prepared for the answers. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think sometimes it depends on the fabric. If I'm using a homespun, I'm going to starch the dickens out of it because homespun tends to ravel and really shift. Some brands of fabric ravel and shift more than others. Flannel likes to shift a lot. Batiks, not so much. Batiks already, by the way that they're made, have wax and they're pre-washed and they're very firm to start with, so starching may not be an option that you need with a batik. There are no batiks in this. These are all just regular quilting cottons. So I do starch these as I press my pieces out, and then I cut them, and then as I'm sewing, I'm going to starch again. I use the flatter spray starch or the best press spray starch, and just do that as I go. By the time I put my entire block together, like when this is sewn, when I'm ready to square it up, I'm going to starch it, and then I'm going to square it up. So by the time I square it up, it's really had 4 or 5 opportunities to be starched, because each time I press things, I'm putting a little starch on it. So I starch as I go. I guess that's the answer to that question. And then we're going to have this discussion about press open or press to the side. In Nancy's pattern, she recommends you press to the side. And I can tell you that I've made part of this block already, and there are places where I understand why she wanted me to press to the side. And if you can get up on this block, Peter. So this one, if you see this piece right here, she got kind of, there's a lot there if I fold that over. If I do it the other way where I press it open, that's very congested right there. See how much congestion I get? But when you press to the side, this really lays pretty flat. So I think you have to look at the situation that you're in and determine what works best for you. Some people are absolutely positively, I have to press open, and that's fine.
How are your results on the points when you press to the side versus when you pressed open? Did it make a difference on your point here?
Well, this point came out really, really nice, and that has
come out very nice.
More to do with me watching when I sewed, that I made sure I hit the right point. I will tell you, when you are pressing to the side rather than open, there's a little more bulk in that seam where the fold happens. And so you do not want to do a very generous quarter by any means. You want to stay on the leaner side of a 1/4 inch. So when you sew a 1/4 inch seam, if you press it open, then your fabric's doing like this, and you've really still got that true 1/4 inch seam. But when the fabric folds under, there's a little fold there where the fabric connects and the threads in there, and it's all, so it makes it just a couple threads. It can make it a little bulky, and it can make it a little less. If it's a generous quarter, then you won't have enough fabric. Does that make sense? So I did make the first 2 blocks. I pressed all the seams open on this, even though the pattern told me to press them to the dark side. And that's not a reference to Star Wars. That's really, it's like you just, when you press to the dark side, most of the time it works out, just because the way fabric goes together. And I got a nice result with pressing the seams open. I'm not saying I'm not anti-press it open, but when I made this particular block and I had so much bulk come together in that corner, I'm like, okay, if I press that open, or if I press that to the side, it's going to be a better block. So I I wish I could say absolutely always never, but that's just not one of these rules I think applies. And the directions in the pattern by the pattern writer tell me to press to one side. So I'm going to do what the pattern tells me, because she may know something later in this pattern that I don't know that is a good reason for me to have everything pressed the way it is. But I can promise you, whether it's always true that if you're pressing open, you can do a very more generous quarter than you can if you're pressing to the side. You've got to make sure it's almost a scant quarter, just to be sure you get that fold and you don't have too much, you don't miss your size. Okay, so that's the starch discussion. That's the open close discussion. So let it be said, so let it be done. We're going to follow the pattern and do what she says. I see the benefits to both ways. I'm just not an always never kind of gal. All right, so the first thing we do is we sew these two strips together. So it tells me the dimensions to cut it. I cut several of these, and the point of doing that is to then, and I'll show you, Peter, if you want to come over here, we're going to cut. Now I have this piece here, and I'm going to use this a lot because with half square triangles, it's my favorite little toy. And then I'm going to cut this to the dimension that she wants, which may or may not be what I'm cutting right now, just so you can get an idea. And I'm just going to continue to cut these into little pieces. Now when I cut it, I'm going to kind of make sure that I have the dimension I'm supposed to have here, and that line sets right where it's supposed to be. And I'm going to wonk that through. And so I'm just going to cut this whole piece. You can see it's a little wavy. I did that on purpose. I wanted you to see how that waviness is not acceptable. I would probably take that out and redo it. I really would. So I'm going to cut those pieces, and that gives me all the little pieces I need for here. And it tells me how many there's to make. I'm going to do it 4 times. There's 4. That means I do 16 of them. The next thing that you have to do is you have to cut for half square triangles. And this is another reason why I like to do block of the months, because I love just working with these 4 fabrics. Now there are people...
Same here.
Yeah.
I just love cutting out what I need to cut out for that block. Because if I were to cut out the whole quilt, I would be exhausted,
yes,
and I'd be ready to knit a pair of socks or something.
I know, but there are people who love to cut the entire quilt and then just sit and sew.
And they're good at it.
And they are good at it. But I need more immediate gratification. I have...
Yes.
I
want to see something sewn together.
I want to see something sewn together. And so for me, a block of the month is a fun thing, because I get to do a little bit at a time. Now it does mean I'm handling and rehandling the same fabric. And to that point, you know, I've already cut everything I've needed for this month out of this piece of fabric. But that means it still goes over here in my little box, and it'll be ready for the next time I have to use it maybe in another box.
That is a great organizational setup right there.
These tubs are all over my sewing room. I have anything that's in progress is in one of these tubs. And so I throw my thread in it. I throw, like, if there's particular things that I know I'm only going to use with this project, they're going to go in that little tub. Now, my problem is my cat thinks these are his bed.
Oh, it's a little kitty basket.
Yeah, and so I set a couple of them up with little blankets in them for the cats to sit in. They won't sit in those. They want to sit in the one that's the project I'm working on, because, you know, they're cats. But anyway, so yeah, that's how I set an in-process project.
Is it safe to say that they're the guardian of your fabric?
Yeah, they're the guardians of my fabric. Well, they know that they don't get to go in that room except when I'm in there, so they kind of are excited to be in there. Okay, so I've cut the strips. I think, you know, basic cutting principles, you understand. You're going to use a ruler. You're going to cut exactly what she tells you. Those parts I feel sure you guys can do. If you need further instruction on that, we can go there, but I think you get it. So the other thing you have to cut is a square. She has you cut squares, and I showed somebody this Saturday, and they were just amazed. So, and I didn't realize it was something people didn't know. So I'm told to cut a square, and she has a size I'm supposed to cut that to, and then I cut it in half. Well, whenever I'm going to cut anything, and these are already cut in half, I take and put this angle right here on this ruler. This is my 9.5 ruler. Right here, I lay that here from point to point, and that's how I cut it. And that's how I get that perfect diagonal cut on any piece that I ever have to do diagonal cuts on. And with the dimensions of this quilt, the way that these two pieces are going to sew together, it's super, super, super important that I have this accurate to the size she tells me, and that diagonal runs perfectly point to point, because this piece has to match that piece when I sew it on. If it doesn't, I'm not going to get my points. So that's super, super, super important. So I cut these squares out. Okay, you've done those, and I've cut them in half, so that gives me my diagonals. And then I have to do some half square triangles. So I have to cut a piece of fabric for this, and I think I have to cut a few for this. I don't think I have enough. Nope, that's the wrong page. I'm like, that doesn't look right. There we go, peek. There we go. All right, so I'm going to cut this. Where'd that cutter go?
Right here.
The other thing I'm going to tell you is when I'm cutting, and I'm given a dimension that is, let's say, 3/8. If the dimension I'm to cut to is 3/8, which is really annoying because I get quarters, I get halves, I get whole numbers, but 3/8 and 5/8 kind of are hard to find, I think, on a ruler. This is one of the reasons why I like Creative Grid rulers, is because it gives me even numbers, which if I have to go up a quarter or if I have to go down, I can find it off of an even number. But if I have to go to eighth cuts, eighth measurements, like 1/8, 3/8, 5/8, I can go to the halves and I can go one notch below a half and I can find my 3/8. So that's one of the reasons why I love a ruler that has the single digit, like one solid numbers are evens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Talking about the white dot.
I'm talking about the white dot. And then when I go to the black dot, they're halves. So for instance, if I'm looking for 2 3/8, I know that I can go to 2 1/2 and go one hash mark below, and I'm at 2 3/8. My brain can find that. My brain, okay, and I'm going to turn it when I can turn it, but it doesn't, okay. When I have to find 2 3/8 here from the solid 2, from the 2-inch mark, I get lost, which is silly, but I get lost in here going, okay, 1, 2, 3. I can find it, but it's just not as easy for my brain to locate it. Conversely, if I'm looking for 2 5/8, I'm going to go to 2 1/2 again, and I know 5/8 is just one hash mark above 2 1/2. And it's just an easier mark for me to find. I don't know that that's a quilting rule. I just know that's how my head figures it out. So that's another reason why I'm really in favor of this ruler, because if I need to find 2 1/4, I can go to 2 and find 1/4. That's easy. But 2 1/8, I can probably find that too. But 2 3/8, ooh, I'm going to have to go to my halves and look either side of the half mark. So sometimes I think when you get the patterns that they have you cut 3/8 and 7/8 and 5/8, sometimes you can oversize it and then trim it down. This is not going to work that way because I have to have exactly the size she says when I cut this in half. If I don't do it exactly to the dimensions she says, which is one of those 3/8, 5/8, 7/8 dimensions, when I cut it, this diagonal won't fit. So you got to do it the way it says. Okay, so I need to cut some squares here. Let me cut some squares because I don't have enough squares to do. I think I have to do a few of these. Let's see. Yeah, let me just cut this right here. And I'm cutting in a way that I might not usually cut, but I've got a limited space here. And it works. You just got to find the way it works. And I don't think there's a right or wrong on that. It's however your brain can find that dimension and make sure that it's accurate. Accuracy matters. It really, really does. And also sharp blades. I can just tell you for a fact you want some sharp blades. If you don't have sharp blades, you're going to regret it. And it's annoying. It's annoying to stop and have to change my blade in my rotary cutter. I hate that. It's like an inconvenience. Isn't that silly? It's just part of the process. You can also cut more than one layer at a time. That's not it. I won't cut much more than 4 layers, depending on what I'm cutting. Especially if, you know, again, it's got to be pretty accurate. Some people are strong enough, I suppose they can cut more, but I'm not comfortable cutting that many layers. Now, here's what's going to happen when I get to the end here. I'm going to have a little chunk left. That should have been pressed. I have this funny little piece left. See that little piece there? Because this is a block of the month, and because I'm only working 1 month at a time, these little pieces may be the piece that I get to the end and go, oh, if I just had a piece this big, I could finish my quilt. So I keep a little Ziploc. Now, I told you my cats, they chewed on this Ziploc. But you know, it's okay. It shows they loved it. They love Ziploc bags. I'll put those pieces in here because when I get to the end,
you might have to sew 2 of those together to make a new piece.
I had a block of the month one time that I got to the end, and I literally did have to sew 2 pieces together to make the block.
Learned that trick from you.
And you know what? The crazy part was,
works.
It worked. You couldn't even tell.
And you can't tell.
You couldn't even tell. I was so excited. But anyway, so I'm just telling you, save all your little pieces and parts because you don't know when you might need it at the end. Or maybe you have a wonderful pet that might end up loving that quilt too, and you need to patch a hole or something. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah.
I like the idea of saving the bits.
Save the little nibbly bits because you never know when you're going to need those. Okay, so I'm going to cut some more squares, and I just was going to cut some squares with you guys just so you can kind of get the idea of, you know, using your ruler. Just because I need a dimension of a square, say I need a 3-inch square or a 4-inch square, I can cut it and still turn and cut it again. That it doesn't always have to be just a strip. You can cut little pieces as you need them. Okay, so here's my fun thing with half square triangles, and you have to make those like any quilt pattern. Lots and lots and lots of half square triangles. She shows you, like most half square triangles, she shows you drawing a line down the middle and sewing on either side of the line. And that's not a bad thing, except by the time I've made 5,000 half square triangles and I've drawn that little line, I'm just over it. So this is the cool thing, and this credit goes to Tammy Vonderschmidt for this tool because she gave it to me and I was like, I don't need that. Yeah, I do. I should have known. Tammy is smart. So what I have here is called diagonal seam tape. And I would have never thought I needed a whole spool of it, because why would you need a whole spool of it? Once you put it on your machine, you use it forever, right? Well, wrong. It kind of gets tired from being used, and so I have to replace it every once in a while. And I share it with my friends. Every once in a while, I'll give them a chunk of it too. It has lots of uses. I don't have my scissors with me, but I put it on my Ginger scissors to mark a spot on those. And you'd be amazed when you have one of these things. It's like, oh, I can use that tape. So it's a good little tape. It's like a Post-it note. It just sticks and resticks. But I've lined it up directly with my 1/4-inch foot. And there's another video called Serendipity #1 where I actually demonstrate how to put this on your machine. But what you want to do is line it up with your 1/4-inch with the center needle right on the red line, and then this where your 1/4-inch lands. Now, I use this particular foot with my machine for my 1/4-inch. You may have another foot that looks different than that has a guide on the side, but this machine, I can use this 1/4-inch foot and I can hit right on the money because I know my fabric needs to hit right there. But with these particular half square triangles that we're going to sew right here, I don't have to draw that line down the middle because I can put my fabric right there, that point, so my stitching line, let me get my stylus. So I'm putting the point of the fabric right there, and my stitching line is right here, and that lines up with here. I can put the point of the fabric under this side of my presser foot because that's the 1/4-inch on that side, and I just know that because I've sewn with it enough. So that in there gets me sewing a 1/4-inch over from what would have been my line had I drawn a line. And now we're going to sew. Make a little half square triangle. Now I'm going to do half square triangles as chain pieced.
I have no idea because I'm not from here.
So I cut out all the, how many does she say? I think 24 maybe half square triangles. I'm going to cut all my half square triangles, or all my fabrics out that make my half square triangles, and I'm going to put them together like this, and I'm going to chain piece those. Now I'm not using the presser foot, I'm just using my stop start button. And there we go. Let's see how fast she's set. And I just guide that. See, I'm just guiding it right along that line. Okay, and then I put the next one in, and I do the same thing. Now, in this pattern, the dimension that she has you cut the half square triangles, she is not leaving a lot of space for you to square it up. It comes out very close. So you need to be careful not to cut too big of a stitch, because if you do and you don't get it the right dimension, if you don't cut that to the right, okay, if you don't cut it to the right size that she tells you, and if you do fat or generous 1/4 inch seams, you're going to be in trouble when you get ready to square it up. That's what I'm trying to say. There, okay. So now that I've sewn through on that side of the 1/4 inch seam, this is where my 1/4 inch line, had I drawn the line, it would be right there. Now I'm going to do the opposite side. And I'm going to sew here. So I'm putting the point under my foot right there so that I get a 1/4 inch from here to here. Right there. That point's right there, which gives me a 1/4 inch there, and the point is there. And now we're going to sew. I slowed it way down so you guys can see. And then I sew. So this gives me that same 1/4 inch, but I'm not having to draw my line. And then I do the same thing with the next piece. I put that right under the foot. I put that right there. And I keep this on that line. And I'm still getting my 1/4 inch on either side of my imaginary line. I just didn't have to draw a line. There you go, there's a whole chain. And then we're gonna just cut them on there. I love this little cutter. Oh my gosh, I think everybody should have one. And a lot of times there's like, if I change the foot in my machine, it's sitting in there. There's pins in there. There's all kinds of little things in there. So now oh, there she goes. Could be the pusher's not pushing hard enough either. Because, you know, operator error is an issue. Alright. Alright, I'll press these to the dark side. Yeah, see that wiggle I'm getting? That tells me I'm probably tugging a little harder than I should. There we go. Those look like they should. So my point, what I really want you to get out of this ruler has this diagonal. And when I'm making half square triangles, what works great is to put that diagonal on that line, and then I can find my corresponding line to make sure I actually get a nice half square triangle that's squared up where it's supposed to be. Okay? And I'm going to turn. And there's the dream of this rotating disc, is I'm able to turn it. Instead of picking up my block and turning it, I'm turning my table. And I can just tell you, that's a dream. Looky there, she's perfect. Now here's what I want to show you about sewing these together. I'm going to take my square, all my parts, once I get everybody cut, and I'm going to put them on a board and watch what I've got to cut. So what I'm actually doing is this corner is the same piece. It's exactly the same piece. You just sew it in this corner, this corner, this corner, this corner. And then I can turn them all. So I can actually stack this block just like this and just do all 16 of them. And then rebuild the block. And if that works for you, that's fine. I like to do like one row of one block and then do the next block. I sew one block at a time. I don't like to do them all together. But I can still do these pieces like this if it works. And that one goes in the center of these two. So organize it however you want. This is the next component that she talks about in the book. So that's the next piece I'm going to show you. When you sew these pieces together, you have your half square triangle that you put in the middle, like this. And then you have these wing pieces. Now these wing pieces, in my brain, are hard to put on. I invariably want to sew them on this way. And that's wrong. And I don't know what about my brain makes me want to do it that way, but it's wrong. The way that they go on is like this. Nope. I'm doing it wrong again. It's like this. See, that's why it's hard for me. Half square triangle is like this. These pieces go like this. That's why you have to cut these diamonds exactly the dimension that she tells you to cut them. You can't cut them any different size. These have to be that size. And the reason they have to be exactly the size they are and you cut it in half is so that this will cross over. Just like that. And these pieces cross right there. And that gives you this little piece right down here. See that? So you want to do it just like she says, so you get your 1/4 inch here and your 1/4 inch here. So what I'll do is I will lay just these pieces on my table, just like that. And I'm going to do all 16 half square triangles with all 32 of these. So I get all my corners done. And that's a super easy piece to sew on. The other thing I like to do is when I sew this piece, I want to sew from the side that has the seams rather than, this piece is completely flat, so I'm not going to sew from that side. I'm going to sew from the back side where the seam is, because I want to be sure that seam lays flat. Especially since I've put it to one side, I want it to be right. There she goes. Right there. There we go. And I'm going to sew. And then that way I'm going over this seam in the right direction and I can make sure it lays flat. Okay? This is a center stitch. So I'm going to fold that to one side. And see, there's a little tail hanging down there. And now I'm going to put this one here. Just like that. But I don't know why the geometries of that confuses me. And again, I'm going to sew from the back side because I want to be sure that comes out with everything laying in the right place. And then what happens is those two pieces cross over and leave a little tail there. That makes it work. See? You get your tail right here. Those cross. And then I take and I sew this piece on. This is the piece that I cut the square and do the diagonal like that. And now I'm going to sew again. And again, this piece is just flat. There's no seams on that. So I'm going to put that piece on the bed of my machine. And I'm going to sew on this piece. Because I want to watch that I sew right through that spot so that I don't lose my point on my triangle. Now you could probably sew from the other side, but I just like to stay on the right side of it. Slow down a little bit. This is where I'm watching that spot. Right there, I really want to just be like one thread width off of that point. So I'm going to make sure I hit that right on. And then when I press that to the side like she says, I'm going to get this piece right here. And then I'm going to place, it's real simple, all 4 of those in the corner. This one's real easy. The centerpiece, these are the little pieces that you cut the strip, the 2.5 inch strips. No, not 2.5 inch strips. The 2 pieces that were strips. I cut those up. And those, with this in the middle, that's a quick sew. Gives me this piece. Okay. So that piece goes in the middle, and then these 4 go in the corner. 2, 3, 4, and I have a couple more of these that come in here. That's your block. And I'm going to sew this in a column, this in a column, and that in a column. And that's how your pieces are going to go together. And she shows in the directions, when you look at it, that you... Let me get on the right page, Cappy. Right here, she's showing you how to press your seams. All right, well, you need to make 4 blocks. Next month we'll be back to show you how to make the next block. And I hope if you're doing this program with us, you're having fun. If you're doing it with another shop, I'm glad that you're participating with them. If you were looking for a kit, we do have a couple kits left here. And I appreciate Nancy Rink and her designing this pattern and the fabric. It's stunningly beautiful. If you'd like to get it, we'll be happy to get you set up with it as well. So thanks so much for watching and have a great day.